Disclaimer: the following video will contain spoilers. Stepping into Snow White's life, an evil sorceress, Gal Gadot, turned queen, has the affinity to be the fairest of them all. But once the magic mirror claims Snow White, Rachel Zegler, the fairest, the queen's ego forces her to go out and eliminate Snow White. I cannot continue this review without first addressing the elephant in the room. This movie was doomed from the start. From the changes to the story, the terrible PR, to the bashful commentary of the original movie. This movie didn't have much leg to stand on. It was dead on arrival, basically. However, I decided to watch it in case there was something to learn here. And to no surprise, there is. Just not what the movie had hoped for. I don't want to talk about how bad the movie did with marketing, PR, etc., because there are countless videos that have done a far better job explaining such events than I could ever do. What I do want to talk about is the story. Unfortunately, even then we can see that despite the many problems this movie had before release, the story isn't any good, making this movie unsuccessful on all fronts. If you were to ask me what the core mistake Snow White made, it would be altering the story in a way that completely changes the original. These changes brought three evident problems: a shift in narrative, contradictions, and an incoherent mess. All of these three can be summed up as butchering the story. But let's try and take a look at each one a bit closer. A shift in narrative. From the start, we heard that Snow White's story would be changed to fit the modern age. The story is outdated and needs changing. I grew worried the more I heard about it. I had hoped that part of the story would give emphasis to certain characters and world building from the original. But as further information was released, it was headed in a completely different direction. The prominent changes are Snow White's name and her character, the prince, the dwarves, and lastly, the fairest of them all. Here is a quick rundown of all of them. Origin of Snow White's name. A seemingly small change that has a huge impact on the story. When the main plot of the movie revolves around Snow White being the fairest one, this change becomes a big deal. The fairest one not only meant physical beauty. Though it was heavily focused on physical beauty in the original, it also touched base on beauty from within. I'll talk about this more later. Her skin being white as snow is one characteristic that adds onto being the fairest. And before you go typing away, this is based on a German fairy tale. I am not insinuating that fair people are only those who have pale skin.
She was evil and robbed the riches of the kingdom for herself.
By altering this change, it completely changes the narrative. It isn't about beauty that rivals the evil queen's perception of beauty. It isn't about jealousy, love, and innocence. It became an empowering movie that emphasizes standing up against oppression. An oppression, mind you, that we never really see or understand why it was occurring. I get the evil queen's evil desires, but it doesn't go beyond that. Much like the original, sure, but they had the opportunity to expand on it, but instead chose to change the narrative while sticking to the structure of the original, which isn't compatible. Snow White's character. How can she be the fairest of them all if we never see that? During the first song, we come to understand Snow White's changed persona. She is fearless, fair, brave, and true, or at the very least implies she will become that. And based on previous PR and marketing interviews, Snow White would grow up to become the leader she was destined to be, which completely disregards her character from the original. Instead of showing a contrast to the evil queen, demonstrating that love and kindness triumphs all, Snow White becomes a symbol of empowerment, rising up against tyranny and oppression. And that change wasn't the greatest given the end result of 2025's rendition.
Don't worry about us. We'll hold them off.
I'll fight with you.
I'm not asking.
I'm making it a fair fight.
Instead of depicting Snow White's true character, she doesn't seem to show any sense of kindness, generosity, or humbleness. Instead of fixing up the dwarfs' place in the hopes that the dwarfs would let her stay at their home, Snow White 2025 enters their cottage, makes herself at home by sleeping on their beds. Then, the next morning, she has them clean up their own house. I will also quickly note here that it was disappointing how they removed the prayer scene in the remake. I felt that that scene shows character as she asks God to bless the dwarves because they have taken care of her. So even if she did ask God to help make her dreams come true, her heart is also thinking of others, adding onto character and her fairness that makes her beautiful. Instead of showing how, even in a terrible situation, she can find goodness and tranquility, Snow White shares an awkwardly odd magical moment with the animals that then take her to the dwarfs' cottage. Lastly, to not drag this out, the scene when she finally returns from the dwarfs' cottage to stand up against the evil queen felt out of place. None of it made any sense. From the plan to its execution, the journey we saw didn't match this ending. To put it bluntly, the third act was a major disappointment. Yes, I will talk about that briefly. The prince. Not even the changes could have fixed this. The prince in the original movie only shows up twice, once in the beginning and again at the end. It's the reason why some people say the prince was a bit awkward. But I would still disagree. Like most early Disney movies, there was various love at first sight moments that would help push the main theme across. In this case, it's kindness, love, and innocence, or humbleness. However, in the remake, the prince appears at around minute 10, but instead of a prince, he is demoted to being a bandit and a thief, who fights in the name of the king. But as we will soon find out, that doesn't make any sense at all. There were so many questions in regards to these bandits' actions that go nowhere. I will have to say that I did like how, at the very least, the reshoots made the love story active, sharing scenes between Jonathan, Andrew Burnap, and Snow White, because we see them bond and get to fall in love with each other. It was just delivered terribly. In short, and I'll expand on this notion, the prince showed more kindness than Snow White ever did. The dwarves. At least they are dwarves, right? I am not going to talk about the uncanny CGI and the whole fiasco and backlash that happened during production, because that doesn't correlate with the story. In fact, I didn't have much issue with the CGI, nor how they looked. Was it bad? Yes. But again, I am more focused on the story. And that is what I want to talk about. We sadly didn't know much about them in the original, and we know less of them here. I had so many questions in regards to their characters and their lore. For example, what was the point of their magical hands? Why do they mine gems? Who are they working for? And what was their part of the plan in Act 3? If they brought in this magical element with their glowing hands to help them find gems, I assumed this would either come in handy later on or have something to do in the story. Perhaps the evil queen hears news of this and wants the dwarfs for herself to get more gems, or maybe they can help her when her powers start to fail. I'll explain in further detail soon. But nothing happened, leaving me wondering why it was even shown in the first place. Their job and them mining gems also doesn't serve a purpose other than to introduce them. But I felt it could have been better. Their plan in Act 3 was just to enter the castle and stand there, menacingly. It's not like anything they, or even Snow White for that matter, did lead to the evil queen's downfall. Heck, in the original, the dwarfs were out for blood, scaring the evil queen to her death, essentially. Here, they did nothing. The fairest of them all. This kept changing meaning that I couldn't keep up. The fairest of them all has two meanings, one of external beauty and the other being internal beauty by being kind, generous, and, dare I say, fair? The movie kept alternating between them, and while technically it wasn't wrong by saying fair as it could mean one of the two, its meaning kept changing that didn't help the story. Within the first 10 minutes, when Dopey, Andrew Barth Feldman, narrates to us the story of Snow White, though at first we don't know it's Dopey until the very end, and I felt that it shouldn't have been narrated as it reduced the story drastically. But the main focus is when Dopey said, "So great was her beauty that it seemed to grant her powers beyond the ordinary. But she only cared about her own beauty and the power it granted." This led me to believe that her being beautiful was the source of her power, which adds reason and motive behind her ego and want to kill off Snow White when the mirror claims her to be the fairest. But I was wrong. It went nowhere. Unless I misunderstood, if I did, please let me know in the comments down below. On a separate note, when the evil queen asks the magic mirror who is the fairest one of all, the mirror replies, You, my queen, of all the women reckoned fair, your beauty is beyond compare. Meaning both. Yet later on it states fair as one or the other. So which is it? At the end, the mirror says, famed is thy beauty, but it goes no further than the skin. For Snow White, beauty comes from deep within. And so, my queen, at last you see, she will always be more fair than thee. Meaning that Snow White is beautiful because of her fairness, not necessarily because of her external beauty. As in, the evil queen is selfish and egotistical. Therefore, Snow White is fairer than her. But we never saw how the evil queen's ruling were unfair. Yes, we see her selfish and egotistical desires of wanting beauty and power. It just wouldn't have hurt to show how this affected the people and her lack of fairness, especially given that Act 3 was focused on the people. It feels like nitpicking, but in the hopes to explain my reasonings, throughout the movie, scenes talked about fair as in fairness. Fairness to govern, fairness to share, fairness to love, etc., etc. Snow White kept hammering her father's fairness of sharing the bountifulness of the land to everyone she could talk to. Yet, the evil queen's motive stemmed from beauty. Just beauty. Perhaps that's the point, as she's so blind about being externally fair that she doesn't see the internal fair. But the movie didn't do a good job explaining that, so I am not entirely sure. She kept stating that a rose is disgusting as it withers away, yet gems never die. Their beauty is outstanding, which sure it mirrors both these characters to a degree, but even then, this analogy was weak. Contradictions. This movie was ridiculed by contradictions. Of course, it's only natural when you alter the story drastically. But, long story short, here are some examples. Changing farmers into soldiers. Did the kingdom not have any soldiers prior to this? Yes, they did. If we look at part of the narration in the beginning, when it talks about the evil queen informing the king of a threat far away, and the king takes his leave to protect his people, we clearly see that there are soldiers following the king. But did the evil queen force the king to take every soldier in his quest? That wouldn't make any sense. Of course, obviously, she does have power and the ability to probably do that, but it wasn't specified. But fine, let's say this makes sense. When we come to Act 3 and Snow White helps the people break illusion or magic they seem to be under by calling the farmers, now soldiers, their name and occupation, it completely contradicts the story we just saw. Like I mentioned before, this scene would have been better if they dove deeper with knowing these characters. But like most things in this movie, it was absent or it doesn't go anywhere. Fearless, fair, brave, and true. I touched base on this, but Snow White was supposed to come to understand these words and live by them. This would help her overthrow the evil queen and be the queen she was destined to be, explained by her reflection in the wishing well, the story, the interviews, etc., etc. However, none of the events in the story would help Snow White get this mantle. All she does is run away, make the dwarfs clean their house, sleep, and then wants to help fight with Jonathan, but because we never saw Snow White do anything in this regard, all we do is say, what the heck is she even going to do? It also doesn't help that when she does do something, it only creates a couple second diversion, which technically didn't work as a soldier managed to almost get her killed. Fair. Keeping fair in fearless, fair, brave, and true doesn't make Snow White fair. Actions do. And when we never see Snow White be fair, the magic mirror's truthful words become lies. In fact, if we take a look at every action someone does for Snow White, we can see that everyone around her is kinder than she is. They help Snow White more than she helps them. The only two times I can see where she helps someone is when Dopey felt sad, but it was a small scene that only showed how you should speak up even when you're afraid, which technically she never did before, but does at the end. And no, it doesn't mean it's good. It's just written poorly. The Evil Queen. The Evil Queen is driven mad because she cannot obtain what she wants, as Snow White stands in the way of that. But if beauty is a source of her power, if this is true, of course, she still technically has power, right? Her striking the mirror doesn't make any sense. Oh, Rod, I hear you say. She was angry at the magic mirror, hence her striking it. That's a fair and valid point. But at the same time, I would consider that weak writing.
Isn't much, but
For I see, she is more fair than thee.
The bandits. The bandits were introduced as bandits who fight for the name of the king. Now, personally, I assumed bandits was just a name given to them. Point is, we see that the bandits are stealing stuff. Part of that stuff is silverware. Of course, I had the illusion that Jonathan, at the very least, would be some sort of Robin Hood, where they steal from the queen and give to the people because they are suffering, because they need help, because the evil queen doesn't want to provide luxuries.
Pies are luxuries. They don't need luxuries.
Anyway, they claim to fight for the king, they claim to be for the people, they claim to help them, but I fail to see how these utensils and items help the people. A cool scene during this Act 2B would be that the soldiers find this crate full of food that they were about to go and take to the people, and they set it on fire. The people. The movie went on and on about the people forgetting how to be fair and how they are afraid of the evil queen. But if you want us, the audience, to care for a kingdom living through hell, then show us these people living in hell. They clearly managed to show us how they lived prior to the evil queen's arrival, but never after. This is another reason why Act 3 was terrible. And finally, talking about it, Act 3. If you want the ending to hit harder, then show these people's lives before. Otherwise, it's just a charade. We don't care about these people because we were never given a reason to care. It also doesn't help that it appears that Snow White learned nothing. She walks up to the queen, lists name and occupation, and the evil queen storms off. Which also doesn't make any sense because aren't the dwarves right in front of her when she storms off? How did she manage to go through? It would have been better if the evil queen began losing her power. She got scared and ran away because Snow White managed to break the illusion and the power that the evil queen had over the kingdom. Perhaps here the magic hands of the dwarves could have played a part in it. An incoherent mess. Due to the backlash, Disney felt obligated to change the story and film reshoots. I'm sure that was the middle section of the movie, when Snow White ventures out to find the bandits. However, this honestly feels like a different movie. It also creates this Frankenstein of a movie where Act 1, Act 2B, and Act 3 are all completely different stories, mashed together with nothing connecting them. This makes it hard to follow and keep up. It also takes you out of the magic of storytelling, all of which is bad. If Act 3 is supposed to bring back the notion that Snow White managed to learn fearless, fair, brave, and true, then the middle section, Act 2A and B, should provide obstacles and a journey that Snow White would inevitably learn this. where Act 1, we are given a setup and introduction to this character and their character flaw. Act 2A followed the structure to a degree of the original, but Act 2B contradicts Act 2A because it completely negates the original, alters the story, changes things, and doesn't help add or emphasize Act 3. In conclusion, Snow White was destined to fail when they decided to change the story to fit a narrative. They completely disregarded the character and what made her special. They completely disregarded the antagonist and what made her tick. They disregarded the prince and how he helped the story. They disregarded the structure and therefore had no sense of storytelling. I don't think I can talk about the dwarves here, as I feel it achieved the same thing as the original. It technically just didn't go anywhere. Either way, every change and every decision these people made the end product a terrible one. There were several contradictions that made me feel like the writers didn't think things through or just completely missed it because they were more focused on the message they were trying to push through. I can't even consider the musical numbers as a good thing because I could never get into the rhythm of it. The soundtrack was okay though, but because everything else was bad, I just didn't have a good time watching this movie. In short, if you want to write a movie based on the original, understand what made the original successful, understand the theme and concept of the original, and stick to that. You can change the story up a little bit, expanding on the original if we never got a chance to do that, but don't change it in the way that pushes some sort of message or agenda or equivalent instead of what actually made the original so special. And of course, if you're going to introduce any mechanic, any character trait, or anything in between, make it matter. And that goes for everything from the dwarfs' hands, to the bandits, to the father being alive, to the bountifulness of the land, etc., etc. Because then you'll end up with a product like Snow White, where it tried to follow the structure while changing up the story that it wasn't compatible and it became a Frankenstein of a movie. Being bad on all fronts. But, anyways, those are just my thoughts. Did you enjoy the movie? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you on my next review. Until then, God bless.